Day by day, there's a bigger reaction across the country about whether or not Biden should be on the presidential ticket. Now, Hollywood is weighing in. As we mentioned, George Clooney was urging the party to move on from Biden after the debate, writing in the New York Times, quote, "Our party leaders need to stop telling us that 50 million people didn't see what we just saw. We're also terrified by the prospect of a second Trump term that we've opted to ignore every warning sign."
Whether you like this or not, President Biden has had the legislative agenda that would rival FDR. And so I think that while people have the right to voice their opinions, they should be rooted in some level of sanity. If you look at where, for instance, if you look at where George W. Bush and John Kerry were at this time of in their race in June and July of that year, Kerry was 7 points ahead of him. If you look at where Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were in their race, October 16th, 2.5 weeks before that election, Romney was 4 points ahead of Obama. So, and the thing that those two people have in common is the power of the incumbency. So you have openly people advocating for a president to give up the power of the bully pulpit and the incumbency months before a presidential election, which is ridiculous. Historically, no president has ever gave up incumbency. No party has ever gave up the incumbency of the president and won the election. It's just never happened.
What I found, there was an interesting point, and I hear you in the historical references. It gives great context to understand how these numbers can shift. But there was a point in this op-ed, and when he talks about how, and I'll read it here, he's talking about how there was new and upsetting information. He talks about, well, no, we all think Republicans should abandon their nominee now that he's been convicted of 34 felonies. And so I just wonder, from the perspective of the timing aspect of it, did you see anything with respect to President Biden and the power of the incumbency that would give you the same level of concern about Republicans trying to replace their nominee because of felony convictions and Biden's 90 minutes?
I think that I interviewed the president on May 29th. A few weeks before the debate at the White House and on Air Force One. Now, obviously, he's an older man. Obviously, there's no disputing that. But let's be clear. The Democrats should be focusing on what's at stake in terms of what they're running against. The one thing that I didn't hear George Clooney mention was Project 2025. And I think we have a decidedly different vantage point. If you look at who Project 2025 affects the most, it is communities of color. It is the people who have less than. Now, if you're a straight white male in this country, you could be disappointed in the election, but it wouldn't have disastrous results. I think that's decidedly a different thing for communities of color. And I think that the vantage point they speak from, I don't think that he speaks for the people that I speak. I speak to millions of people every day on my radio show. And that's the sentiment I hear that is kind of bantered around. And so I just think the one thing I can say for sure is the reticence that a lot of young black men have with the Democratic Party is the cowardice at every turn, the hand wringing, the fecklessness, and they exhibited it all the time, and it's just a lot to take.
You know, I'm a fan of your show and listen to it all the time, and I wanted you to unpack a little bit more about what you're hearing on that idea of the cowardice, because one of the criticisms I often hear is Democrats eat their own, that there's a circular firing squad.
Absolutely.
That they attempt to have a moral high ground is to their detriment. And yet, there is something to be said about having a moral compass, about having the high ground, and about calling out wrong wherever it may be. But tell me about what you're hearing from people about how they view these last couple weeks.
Well, here's the thing. LBJ had the moral compass. He left. Richard Nixon became president, and that, for black people, became the onslaught of mass incarceration and the war on drugs. It had disastrous consequences for black people. When Donald Trump won, it had disastrous consequences for black people. If you look at who suffered the most under those policies, if you look at his COVID reaction, who died the most? So this, for me, is not a whimsical conversation. For me, it's not a conversation about what is uncomfortable. It is what is necessary. Look at Project 2025 and tell me for sure. I watched the mass media, and no one has interviewed anybody seriously with the fervor about Biden's age that they do about Project 2025. No one. And who does it affect? If they disband or absolve the Department of Education, who does it affect primarily? Environmental rollbacks, who does it affect primarily? all the things that are geared, if they DEI or if they Black History, who does it affect? Because the truth of the matter is in 2020, it was the Black and brown people that fired Donald Trump. More white people voted for him in 2020 than voted for him in 2016. Black and brown people fired him. And as a result of this, we have these draconian measures in Project 2025. And more, rather than Democrats focusing on that, they're focusing on the age of a man. By the time this is over, one thing is for certain, Joe Biden will be older. And Project 2025 will still be the platform that is running behind all of this.
You know, this has been one of the big criticisms that people have not gone after what are the obvious Achilles heels of one's opponent. And you mentioned that you also interviewed Vice President Harris, I believe, about a month ago as well. And I do want to get your take, given, you know, Project 2025 has more than a few dog whistles, shall we say, and there's also overt statements that are now being made. I said more than overt dog whistles, I'm saying, in terms of thinking about it. And there are also moments when people are using race and having those discussions to criticize the Vice President of the United States. And I want to get your take on something that she's recently been facing, been facing for quite some time, but especially now that she's being named as possibly someone to top a ticket. Listen to what the former Trump official, Sebastian Gorka, had the nerve to say about her.
She's a DEI hire, right? She's a woman. She's colored, therefore she's got to be good. Yeah. And at least her brain doesn't literally freeze in mid-sentence.
Now, I don't know if you can see who's on that screen, but one of them on the right, I believe, is Matt Whitaker, who is the former acting Attorney General of the United States with that smile on his face. What do you make of these attacks?
It's an interesting thing. 17 senators gone on to become president. She was one of them. She's one of those, vice president. Very few people, she's been an attorney general of the largest, most populous, most wealthy state in the country. So there is this notion, America has been more damaged by GCI than DEI. The greedy, corrupt, incompetent white men have caused more damage to the United States of America than diversity, equity, inclusion. Who caused Boeing? Who caused the mortgage crisis? Who caused our reaction and our lack of reaction to COVID? It wasn't, because what people do is blame the things they can't control. Kamala Harris is more than qualified to accept the presidency of the United States of America, which is interesting because her test to be president wasn't fealty. It wasn't much like Donald Trump's, whoever he select will be. It is her professionalism and her actually ability to run the country. And another point is, if Joe Biden, as a lot of people worry, can't complete his term, who's more better qualified than to complete his term than Vice President Harris? So you have a twofer. You have both the power of the incumbency, and somebody is more than willing, capable, and able to run the presidency should he cede or should he not be able to complete his thing. So what men do, what mediocre white men do, is blame things. They have no excuse for their failures. The reason that Donald Trump did not get a second term is because he so mishandled COVID that he was fired by the American people.